In March 2006, a young couple from a quiet neighborhood in Memphis, Tennessee, had gone missing. 21-year-old Stephanie Grace Smith and 22-year-old James Smith were newlyweds, married for a little more than a year. They were last seen alive on March 16, and no one has heard from them since. Police checked the Smiths' home and found no signs of the couple. The house also shows no signs of forced entry, nothing was broken, and nothing was out of place. Police left empty-handed with no clue what happened to the couple. One neighbor told police she heard a disturbing noise the night the couple was last seen. She said that on Thursday morning at 2 o'clock, she heard a woman screaming. She said there were loud screams and she knew something was wrong. Neighbors had begun to notice strange things at the house. The couple's cars had disappeared. Someone had moved their garbage cans. Their pit bulls had stopped barking. An investigator ran a background check on the Smiths and found that Stephanie withdrew $5,000 from the couple's account the day after she was last seen leaving work. Investigators also learned that Stephanie was seen withdrawing the money with James' uncle, 29-year-old Larry Mosley, who also lives right next door to the Smiths. Police went to find Mosley at the office where he worked as a handyman, but he was not there. Mosley's employer said that he called Mosley when he didn't show up for work and that Mosley said he'd quit. Police checked Mosley's truck and found a big roll of heavy-gauge black plastic and some weights. Trying to find Mosley, they went back to his home right next to the Smiths' house, but he wasn't there. At first, they found no signs of foul play. The inside of the house showed nothing out of the ordinary, except police smelled a mixture of chlorine and a smell of death. Police knew something was wrong, so they went back inside. This time, they brought a UV light and luminol to help detect traces of blood. They went to check Mosley's bedroom and found a mattress which had been cut. They turned on the UV light and sprayed luminol all over the room. There they found blood splatters everywhere. They continued to search the house and found a hidden entrance to a crawl space in the attic, where they discovered the bodies of Stephanie and James, bound with cables and tightly wrapped with black plastic bags and white sheets. The autopsy report concluded that they both died through multiple blunt force injuries to the head. Police then tried to find Mosley, but learned he was on the run with his father in Mississippi. After a police chase, Larry Mosley's father shot Larry to death and then turned the gun on himself. Larry Mosley's motive for the murder of Stephanie and James Smith has still not been determined to this day. Number 3. The Greyhound Bus Murder. At 12:01 p.m. on July 30, 2008, 22-year-old Tim McLean, a carnival barker, was returning home to Manitoba after working at a fair in Alberta. He departed Edmonton on board Greyhound Bus 1170 to Winnipeg via the Yellowhead Highway through Saskatchewan.
There we go, we are recording. So, I'm on the Greyhound bus. I'm Greyhound too. Look, I met up with Aaron. Yeah, there he is.
He sat at the rear, one row ahead of the restroom. At 6:55 p.m., the bus departed from a stop in Erickson, Manitoba, with a new passenger, 44-year-old Vince Wei-Guang Lee. Lee, described as a tall man with a shaved head and sunglasses. Some passengers say he seemed agitated and possibly confused as he climbed aboard, but he did not seem to be a threat. He chose a seat near the front of the bus, spoke to no one, and eventually disembarked briefly to smoke a cigarette at a rest stop. When Lee returned to the bus, he seemed dissatisfied with his original seat, choosing instead to sit next to Tim McLean towards the rear of the bus. McLean barely acknowledged Lee, then fell asleep against the window pane, headphones covering his ears. Just moments after the bus began moving, Lee calmly pulled out a massive hunting knife and began using it against McLean. The young man instantly snapped to attention and began screaming in pain and horror, a scream that haunts many of the other passengers to this day. Although he fought desperately for a few moments, he was no match for the killer. As Lee stabbed McLean over and over, he was calm and methodical, never changing his expression or showing emotion. Onlookers were shocked by his lack of rage and the way he committed the killing almost robotically, stabbing him close to 60 times, according to one witness. As the screams of horror filled the bus and the driver pulled urgently to the side of the road, Lee began to cut off McLean's head and dismember his body. As the passengers ran screaming from the bus, the driver and 2 other brave men carefully boarded the bus again to see if they could help the victim. Lee chased them away with the knife, forcing them to exit the bus and lock the door from the outside. Lee then grabbed McLean's severed head and brandished it for the stunned passengers, dropping it near the door and then retreating to eat some flesh from the mutilated body. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police were not prepared when they received word of what happened on the Greyhound that day. They arrived to find Lee still on the bus and a group of men guarding the door with a crowbar and hammers. The driver had cleverly engaged the emergency immobilizer system, so the killer could not attempt to drive the bus away. By 9 p.m., the police were in a standoff with Lee as he paced the length of the bus trapped inside, until special negotiators and heavily armed tactical units arrived on the scene. When he tried to escape through a back window of the bus, he was tasered twice and handcuffed. When police boarded the bus, they were faced with an intensely gruesome scene. Not only had McLean's remains been hacked apart, but although Lee was obviously responsible for his actions that evening, Canadian law has surprisingly lax requirements for those with mental illness. Lee refused to hire a lawyer. However, those who represented him stated he could not be accountable for what he did due to his untreated schizophrenia, and the judge agreed. As a result, the judge ruled that Lee was not criminally responsible for the killing. Lee was remanded to the Selkirk Mental Health Center. Because Lee was a cooperative patient during his time at Selkirk Mental Health Center in Manitoba, he eventually gained more and more freedom, including the privilege of going outside and having visitors. In an even more shocking development, Lee changed his name to Will Baker and was released from the facility and granted full freedom. Although McLean's parents have said they have no words for the grave injustice of this decision, Lee has been living on his own in a Winnipeg apartment since November 2016. On August 13, 2018, the faces of pregnant Shannon Watts and her 2 daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, were printed on missing person posters after they suddenly disappeared from their home in Frederick, Colorado. At first, Shannon Watts' husband, 33-year-old Chris Watts, agreed to TV interviews in which he appeared torn up over their sudden disappearance and begged for their safe return. Just 2 days later, he was arrested in connection with their deaths. On social media, the couple seemed like they had a perfect marriage. In a video shared online, Shannon described how she met Chris after he sent her a friend request on Facebook, and how lucky she was that he had stuck by her through her battle with autoimmune disease lupus.
And he's the best thing that has ever happened to me.
She also shared a video of Bella singing "My Daddy is a Hero." But Chris Watts had secretly started seeing a co-worker, 30-year-old Nicole Kessinger, telling her that he and his wife were in the process of separating. Kessinger claimed that she started dating Watts seriously at the end of June. While Shannon Watts spent most of her summer in North Carolina with relatives, he spent more and more time with his new girlfriend, and his wife noticed him growing distant. She desperately tried to salvage their relationship. When she returned from a business trip the morning of August 13, she and Chris Watts got into a fight, which would end with 15 weeks pregnant Shannon Watts being strangled to death and their 2 daughters smothered. While Chris Watts has not offered a full explanation for what led him to strangle 34-year-old Shannon and smother Bella 4 and Celeste 3, the file suggests that while his wife fought to save their 8-year relationship, Watts was consumed by a blossoming romance with Nicole Kessinger, who later reported their affair to the police. In a videotaped interview with Weld County Sheriff's Department officers on August 16th, one day after Chris Watts was arrested, Nicole Kessinger said she believed financial issues were the primary motivation for the murders, but admitted the barely 2-month-long relationship might have accelerated the process. Although she knew about Bella and Celeste, Kessinger claimed she first learned about Shannon's pregnancy while watching a news report the week of the family's disappearance. When she confronted Chris Watts, he lied and said he had just learned about the pregnancy himself and that Shannon had told him the baby wasn't his. On June 11, Shannon Watts recorded this video of her surprising her husband with the news that she's pregnant for a 3rd time. Chris Watts seems genuinely excited.
That's awesome. Guess when you want to, it happens.
Later, Watts tried to throw his deceased wife under the bus again, telling his father and the police that he had strangled Shannon in a rage after she killed their 2 daughters, which prosecutors said was contradicted by the forensic evidence. Kessinger admitted to the detectives that before contacting police, she deleted a number of raunchy text message exchanges because she was grossed out, and authorities don't believe she was involved in the murders. While Kessinger claims that she and Watts never discussed the future of their relationship, Watts did involve his mistress in his search for a new apartment, and both Watts and Kessinger's Google search histories indicate they were on each other's minds. Back in July, weeks before the murders, Kessinger searched Google for, "Man, I'm having an affair and he says he will leave his wife." Then, in early August, she spent over 2 hours searching Google for wedding dresses. She also searched Google on topics related to marrying your mistress on August 8. On August 14, the day after Chris Watts' family went missing, Kessinger spent nearly 4 hours searching the internet for information about Shannon and news accounts of Shannon's disappearance. Then she deleted the search history. These searches were conducted frequently by Kessinger throughout the next several days. She deleted everyone afterwards, investigators wrote. That same day, Kessinger searched Google for the following topics: can cops trace text messages? And how long do phone companies keep text messages? As well as difference between text message content and text message detail, according to police documents. Chris Watts, meanwhile, searched for things like, how does it feel when someone says I love you? And researched secluded vacation destinations. Text messages are also among the released documents. At several points, Chris Watts juggled text exchanges from his concerned wife and his mistress at the same time. Contrary to Chris Watts' claim that Shannon killed their daughters when he said he wanted to separate, Shannon's text messages demonstrate that while she was confused and hurt by his cold, sudden withdrawal, she was also rational and level-headed, hardly homicidal. Chris Watts vacillated between dropping emotionally devastating bombshells and giving Shannon false hope that their marriage could be saved. Shannon also told the same friend, "I don't feel safe with him," after what he said about the baby. But just one day later, on August 9th, she texted another concerned friend. OMG, much better. We talked. He told me he loved me back. Still cold, but not as cold. He even kissed me before going to sleep in the basement. Her excitement was short-lived. On August 9, Shannon went on a business trip and left the girls with Watts, who arranged for a babysitter one evening, supposedly so he could attend a sports game with his friends. Instead, he took Kissinger out to dinner, paying with his credit card instead of a gift card for the first time. The charge didn't escape Shannon's notice. She later texted a friend that the amount seemed large for a meal for one. But Chris Watts had denied having an affair, and Shannon told a friend that she doubted that he had it in him. A few days later, Shannon and her 2 girls were dead. In the early morning hours of August 13th, a neighbor's surveillance camera captured Chris loading cans of gasoline into his truck before backing the vehicle into the home's garage. When he left shortly thereafter, the remains of his family were hidden in the truck bed and then later dumped on an oil site owned by his employer. Shannon's body was found in a shallow grave near 2 oil drums containing the remains of Bella and Celeste. Autopsy reports concluded that all 3 victims died of asphyxiation. Shannon was strangled while the 2 girls were smothered. Shannon was found in a purple t-shirt and underwear. She had patterned abrasions on her neck and the left side of her face when her body was found. Bella's report indicates she had a pink pajama-type top with images of hearts and butterflies and underwear on when her body was found. The coroner found blunt force trauma on Bella's jaw and lacerations and contusions in her mouth. Her left shoulder was discolored, and teeth impressions and superficial bite marks were found on the surface of her tongue, which indicates that Bella fought for her life. Celeste was found in a pink and black t-shirt, wearing a diaper and underwear. Unlike her sister, she had no visible injuries. A few hours after the murder, while Shannon's friends and family were starting to panic about her whereabouts, Chris was Googling the lyrics for the song Battery by Metallica. They include smashing through the boundaries, lunacy has found me, and pounding out aggression turns into obsession. Cannot kill the battery, cannot kill the family. Shannon's friend, Nicole Atkinson, showed up at the house looking for her, as she had missed an appointment, but she didn't answer the door. She immediately called Chris and then the police. Once both the police and Chris arrived, Chris led the officers into their home where they discovered Shannon's purse, keys, and phone still in the home, as well as her suitcase at the bottom of the stairs. Heading upstairs, they found that the couple's bed had been stripped of its sheets and blankets, but saw no signs of foul play. It was like she and the girls had just vanished. Chris told police that his wife ran off with their daughters while he was at work that day, but a surveillance video footage from his neighbor only shows Chris leaving the house during that period. In the video taken on a police officer's body camera, Chris looks nervous as he watches the surveillance footage, captured by his neighbor Nathaniel Trinistich. About a minute into the video, Watts puts his hands on his head and looks away from the screen. Near the end of the video, Watts goes outside to speak to a detective, while Officer Scott Coonrod stays and talks to Trinistich. Once Chris is out of the room, Trinistich turns to the officer and says, "He's not acting right. Police later learned that Chris Watts had a mistress and found assorted images of Nicole Kessinger, some semi-nude, into the secret calculator application on his phone. On August 19, days after the bodies of Shannon, Celeste, and Bella were found, Nicole Kessinger searched the internet on topics related to Amber Frey. Frey was the mistress of Scott Peterson, who murdered his wife and their unborn child. Her searches included Frey's book deal, her net worth, and did people hate Amber Frey? The searches seemed to suggest that Kessinger might try to capitalize on the media attention she was getting. Christopher Watts has been sentenced to 5 life terms for the murders of Shannon, Bella, and Celeste, and is not eligible for parole. Cody Lee Johnson and Jordan Lynn Graham, residents of Kalispell, Montana, began dating in late 2011. The couple became engaged in December 2012, and on June 29, 2013, were married. While couples who indulge themselves with lavish weddings are just as likely to be divorced as people who get hitched in City Hall, family members and guests who attended the Johnson extravaganza didn't expect this marriage to end so quickly and so violently. As it turns out, Cody Johnson was just as clueless as his wedding guests. The 25-year-old groom had no idea that his 22-year-old bride wanted the wedding more than the marriage. Almost immediately after the big ceremony, she confided to her friends that she already regretted marrying Johnson. When she uttered the pledge, "Until death do us part," this bride, instead of thinking of spending the rest of her life with this man, may have been contemplating widowhood within a matter of days. Being on Jordan's information, searchers located Cody's body in an area so steep and rugged, a helicopter had to be employed to recover his corpse. According to police report, Johnson fell face first nearly 200 feet down the ravine, hitting a rock outcropping where his shoe was later found, before landing in a pool of water. The impact crushed Johnson's right eye socket and resulted in a 7-inch skull fracture. His legs were badly bruised and multiple ribs broke during the fall. His heart was also torn open. State medical examiner Gary Dale, who performed the autopsy on Johnson, testified that Johnson died of blunt force trauma, and his injuries were similar to those that someone would receive in a car crash. Members of Cody Johnson's family, who suspected Jordan of murdering her new husband, called for an investigation of his death. Since he died in a national park, the FBI took over the case. On July 16, 2013, while being questioned by Special Agent Stephen Liss, Jordan admitted that she had lied to the local police about the circumstances of her husband's disappearance. He had not gotten into a car with friends that night. That evening, following a heated argument, Jordan and Cody had driven to the park to cool off. They continued fighting, however. While standing at the viewpoint above the cliff, he grabbed her by the arm. Jordan said she removed his hand and gave him a shove, which propelled him over the cliff. She admitted that she had pushed him in anger, but denied an intention to kill him. In March 2014, Jordan pleaded guilty to second-degree murder following the closing arguments at her trial. The judge sentenced her to 30 years in prison. U.S. District Judge Donald Malloy, in handing down his sentence, pointed out that the defendant had initially lied and changed her story about what happened to her husband. Moreover, she never apologized or showed remorse. After admitting her guilt, she claimed she had felt physically ill at the prospect of having sex with her husband. In 2012, after video footage surfaced of a group of 4 young sisters and 2 brothers singing and dancing to music, village elders who saw this as a violation of strict tribal customs reportedly ordered those in the video and their families be killed for their dishonorable behavior. The 4 young women in the video were allegedly tortured and killed by members of their own family. And while the two brothers in the video went into hiding, 3 of their brothers were murdered by the girls' family in a revenge attack. The video, apparently taken with a cell phone, shows 4 women in colorful traditional chatters, squatting on a bare floor. They clearly don't want to be filmed. They hide their faces and look away. You hear a male voice speak and apparently requesting them to sing, and they start clapping hesitantly at first, then more strongly. Their humming grows into a song. A young man gets up to dance, arms outstretched in the graceful, bird-like dance of the tribal mountain people. It is believed that the cell phone video was made in 2011 in a village deep in Kohistan, a rugged area of northwest Pakistan. It was the last time the young women, known as Baziga, Sareen Jan, Begum Jan, Amina, and Shaheen have ever been definitely seen alive. According to court filings and interviews with people who investigated it, the families confined the girls for weeks, threw boiling water and hot coals at them, then killed them and buried them somewhere in the Kohistan hills. Mohammed Afzal Kohistani, the brother of one of the boys in the video, was the one who made the news public, alleging that the girls had been killed on May 30, 2012, on the orders of a cleric who had led a 40 to 50 member tribal jirga. Later, when investigators appeared, relatives and community leaders insisted that the girls were still alive and produced a second set of similar-looking girls to prove it. They even disfigured one girl's thumbprints so she couldn't be checked against the identity of the victim she was supposed to impersonate. One journalist sent photos of both groups of girls to analysts in England, who found only 14% chance that they were the same individuals. That evidence was taken to a provincial court, but it declined to take any action. Kohistani, in the interview, named each of the original girls and their replacements, who he said were similar-looking sisters, cousins, and sisters-in-law. Once more, a fact-finding mission was sent to the village. This time, it included a district judge and 2 police officers, armed with government ID records, with the heights and thumbprints of the missing girls. What they encountered was hair-raising. In his report afterward, Kohistan Judge Shawib Khan said the village elders were unanimous in insisting that the girls were alive, but 2 of the girls they produced were much younger than the victims, according to their official birth dates. A third could not be identified because both thumbs had been burned, and that the others were probably also imposters. The Apex Court ordered Nadra to match fingerprints and SNICs. The tests came back negative. In December 2018, police claimed they arrested 4 suspects in November. The suspects were namely Umar Khan, Saber, Mohammed Sarfraz, and Sair.